Hey there, I'm Mike Dunn with Gaming Trend, and we are here with James Introcaso of MCDM Productions. And I don't know if you've seen this in BackerKit lately, but they've got a big crowdfunding campaign going on right now. Probably bigger than they even imagined it would be at this point. Um, and and so we thought we'd take some time and chat with James about that. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really, really excited to talk about this game. Feel really good about the fact that the game is funded, which means that we get to make it. We all get to keep our jobs at MCDM for a little while longer, and we get to make something awesome with people. So I'm excited, and I'm always excited whenever anybody asks me to come on and talk about the work. So thank you, Mike, for having me on. What you're doing is very, very important as well, and my hat is off to you and all the folks at Gaming Trend. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and just to continue the slavish praise, I'm a huge fan of MCDM. Been a big fan
Thank
of
you.
Matt's how to be a DM videos, running the game videos,
Yes.
for a while now. I would say probably very influential in my own DMing in recent years. And big fan of what you guys have been doing for the fifth edition supplement on the fifth edition supplement side, and really enjoy the Arcadia magazine that you guys have been producing on Patreon, and really excited about your new RPG. So let's dig right in, shall we? So I guess the beginnings of this, well, probably not the very beginnings of it, but the beginnings of like actually like going in the direction that you're in right now probably started back during the OGL debacle earlier this year. I guess tell me about how. I'm not exactly sure when you personally joined the team.
Yeah.
But were you on MCDM when that happened? Were you already working there at that time?
Yeah, so I started freelancing with MCDM. I was a freelance writer and game designer in 2019 is when we first started to work together. Matt actually put out a call, like an open call for writers, and I was one of the writers who worked on a book that has not actually been released yet called A Player's Guide to Capital. And from there, then I started to work on Kingdoms of Warfare with Matt and the rest of the team, and then they made me an offer to come on full time when Arcadia started up. They were looking for someone to manage Arcadia full time, which was a 5th edition magazine that was delivered through Patreon. And so that was it at the end of 2020 was really when I came on board full time with MCDM. So I've been full time for about 3 years now. With them, which is pretty exciting, and we've done a lot of stuff in that time. So I was the lead designer for a book called Flea Mortals that they put out, a lead designer for a book called Where Evil Lives, in addition to continuing to put out Arcadia. Eventually a woman named Hannah Rose came and took over. Yes, there it is. We've got them. And a big part of when I was interviewing was that like Matt was saying to me, hey, if you want to come on board, work full time, what do you want to do in the future? And I was said to him, like, I don't want to work on 5e forever. That's not like that. I like working on 5e, but it's not terribly interesting for me to do it for the rest of my career. Right. And I had made role-playing games before and I'd worked on other role-playing games. So I was like, I would really like to make my own. And Matt had said, well, I really want to make my own role-playing game too. Right. And so we have a lot of ideas for different role-playing games. And we had this idea for like, what would the flagship game be? Right. The game where, hey, we're planting our flag, we're making our own game, and we want you, the people who like all of our 5e stuff, to come play that and experience it and maybe add that to your library as well, right? What would that be? And so we had a lot of conversations about that before the beginning of this year, which is when the OGL news really hit, right?
Right.
And it was sort of like we were tinkering with this rocket ship right out in the backyard, and then the OGL news dropped, and it was like Hasbro came and lit that rocket for us.
Right.
And it moved to the top of the queue in terms of like, okay, when our 5e, when these commitments that we already said we're going to make are done, we're starting on the game now, right? That might have been another year or two down the line if not for that, but we had already had development meetings and talked about what we think this game should be, what would it be like, and it just ended up being like, you know what, we got to do this now, because and I am very glad that Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast have walked back that decision, right? And I think they made the right call for a lot of third-party creators out there, for a lot of independent folks who make D&D content. But what it showed to us was like, we can't rely on this, right? There's another set of rules coming, call it 6th edition, call it 2nd, 5th edition, whatever you want to call it, right? There's another set of rules coming, and we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know if we'll be able to create for it. Better for us to make our own thing and own that and create it and distribute it how we would like, as opposed to being under creating DLC for a company who, like, rightfully so, has their own goals, right? And so so that was a big part of us moving on. Yeah.
Now, obviously that was a big impetus for like pushing that project to the top of the queue. But like what I guess you can't really speak too much for Matt, but more on your own. But like what really kind of inspired you guys to work on a new RPG whole cloth like this?
Yeah, well, so we've been working on 5th edition for a long time, right? Matt and I combined, right? It's like I've been working on it since making third-party products and expansions, and I worked for Wizards doing some official stuff as a freelancer, right? So I've been working on it for like 10 years, feels like. And then, Matt also had Kingdoms of Warfare and Strongholds and Followers that he had been working on, and he'd worked on role-playing games for years and years before that. And so when we sat down, the reason we wanted to make a new system was we thought like the best way to serve people is to think about like from the ground up, what would we build if we could build something, right? Not what would we change about D&D, but what would we make to support a game? And we first said like, well, what's the fantasy we're trying to make? And we talked a lot about like, what do people expect from role-playing games these days when they sit down to play D&D or Pathfinder or Shadow of the Demon Lord or whatever it is? What do they want to do? What is the big expectation? And we think a lot of people, the game has evolved over the years from like people who want to dungeon crawl and basically find treasure and treasure for XP, right? And to now a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are looking for a heroic fantasy, right? They want to be the characters in Lord of the Rings and save people, right? They want to have these big, heroic, cool, cinematic moments where they can do awesome stuff with their friends at the table. And so we said, okay, well, we want to specifically support heroic fantasy, right? You're in a fantasy world with dwarves and elves and dragons and stuff, and you are a hero. You are there to save people and do cool, incredible things. Your goal is not to necessarily amass a lot of money. That's not to say there isn't money in the system or treasure, right? But your goal is really about the story and about the things that you're going to do as a hero. And so we said like, okay, let's look at some systems that we think do that well, right? And for us, a lot of D20 fantasy is very broad, right? D&D, one of the strengths of 5e that is great for third-party creators is you can hack it apart pretty easily and create more stuff for it, right? Which means that it serves Wizards of the Coast design goal, which is the 5th edition when it came out was the addition to unite all editions. So it served the goal of like, hey, if you want to do a dungeon crawly, you're counting torches and rations kind of thing, we've got rules for that. If you want to do a more heroic thing, we've got rules for that, right? But as a result of being very broad, it's kind of shallow then when it comes to this specific type of game you want to play. So we picked one of those things, heroic fantasy, and we went deep on it, right? And that's why we built our own system, because we were like, well, does a D20 serve heroic fantasy? Not as well as some other things. So let's make our core mechanic something else, right? And that's how it sort of evolved, right? Is we start with what's the fantasy we want to support? How do we best support it? And it turned out the best way to support heroic fantasy, we thought, was building an entirely new system.
Well, and I know Matt has frequently dipped into previous editions of D&D for inspiration for some of the things that he's talked about in his videos. And I believe some of that is even translated into some of the books y'all have created. Probably the most prevalent that I can think of is Matt brings up a lot of fourth edition. Brings up fourth edition quite a bit, and which is interesting because a lot of the D&D community kind of frowns upon fourth edition, right? Like it was it was the one that didn't work out. I actually did get a chance to play fourth edition a few times personally as my son was getting older, and I was trying to introduce him into things that I was interested into when I was a kid. And the thing that really struck me about fourth edition is how it tried to kind of introduce concepts from video games into the mix, concepts and mechanics of video games into the mix. Like boss monsters and monsters having like low level minions that kind of ramp up the kind of epic feel of it, and also kind of like the kind of easy to navigate mechanics of your character. They depending on a lot of card stuff. Would you say that fourth edition has influenced this RPG to the level that maybe the videos that Matt has posted over the years has kind of brought on board, into the bag of tricks?
It definitely has influenced what we're working on right now. There's a lot we're doing that's different than fourth edition, right? Particularly,
not trying
like
to
even
imply that you're copying fourth edition or anything.
No. It's every time we talk about this, there are people watching, and so I just want to be clear to be like, it's not a hey, but. The thing about fourth edition that is great for this particular game, right, is that fourth edition, I think, in addition to feeling more modern, right, which is one of the things we want to do is like, how can we modernize a lot of the things that we're doing? And by that, we mean make it appeal to someone and it doesn't feel like archaic. Like, why are we doing this, right? And often the answer when you look back in D&D, like, why is there both, a web spell and an entangle spell, right? Why do we need both of those? Well, because there's always been those, right? Why do we need to have ability scores when what really matters is your ability modifiers? Well, because we've always had ability scores, right? We are not beholden to that because our game is not like a brand. And maybe 30 years from now, if we're lucky enough for the game to still be around and people still be making stuff for it, maybe we'll have made the same sort of mistakes in terms of like, well, now this game has a legacy and something people expect. And I think a lot of what fourth edition did that people were unhappy with was that they were expecting D&D, and what they got was a pretty explicitly heroic fantasy game, right? Yeah. Which is why it's good for us to take inspiration from it, because they sort of saw where the game had been going in third and 3.5 and said like, oh, people want to be powerful, right? People want to be more survivable at first level. People want to be able to do cool things even as fighters and even as rogues, right? They want to have options on their turn. And they leaned so hard into that people thought, this isn't D&D anymore, right? We don't have that expectation to worry about. And so all of those things that made fourth edition heroic, we were like, cool, we're going to take this and we're actually going to lean into it even more in most cases, right? That we're going to make it so that like you feel like your character is powerful and heroic and has a lot of options on their turn. Those are sort of the things that make you make the game more heroic for a lot of people, is this feeling of like, oh, cool, I'm competent when I sit down, and the things that I do really well. Call of Cthulhu, there are things your character does better than everybody else and still could fail at most of the time, right? Because that is a different kind of game, a different kind of story they're trying to tell. We did take a lot from 4th edition because it's definitely the most heroic from the get-go edition of the game in our eyes.
Well, and I mean, even further, I know Matt has experience in the video game industry, and obviously at Gaming Trend, we like to kind of point out like the connections between the video game industry and the tabletop industry. Have you had any experience in the video game industry as well?
So I'm one of the only people at MCDM. We have 9 full-time staffers, and I think I might be the only one who doesn't have... Now, I'm not sure about one person, I'm realizing, but I think everybody else has video game experience, right? A lot of them, a lot of the people who were there, the founders of MCDM, they came from Turtle Rock Studios, right? Or Matt knew that they had worked at Turtle Rock and now they worked at Blizzard and, like that kind of thing. So Matt, pretty much everybody comes from video games, except for me. I have never actually worked in video games. I'm all tabletop. I did work in video, but that's not video games. So.
Yeah, I mean, it can be game-like at times, like when you're dealing with technical bugs.
Yes. I mean, again, there are bugs. There's all kinds of stuff. So it's and it definitely affects the way that we do things, right? So like we have, and from the beginning, from before I was there, MCDM has had a QA lead. Right? Someone who is in charge of QA. And so we have this very robust system for testing that Lars, who is that person, has set up, right? And this pipeline for testing that Lars sets up, and we're constantly evaluating and talking about, like, what's the best way to do this? What's better way to get the best information from our testers, right? Our testers are great. And so that is a huge, huge part of what we do is people bringing in their video game knowledge. Now, that's not to say that other places don't test and don't have their methods, but our method is very similar to the way Lars was running things over at Turtle Rock when he was in charge.
Yeah, I think I watched one of the videos last week or the last few days. Where you're talking about. I think it was actually just a couple of days ago when you were talking about the some of the systems that you have in place, or that you're tinkering around with, and you talked about that bug system, that bug tracking system, and I was like, the former software designer in me perked up. I was like, I know this, So, but it made me think, it made me kind of think and look at some of the other stuff that you guys have talked about doing in the light of, you're kind of approaching it in the same way that software design and game design, video game design, is not just in terms of how you're tracking what work you're doing, but also in terms of streamlining mechanics. A lot of what you guys are talking about sounds like the streamlining of mechanics that would happen in a video game, because in a video game you have the hard wall of what you can actually do in the computer or in the console, right? And so I think it's an interesting sandbox you guys have created that is just kind of bringing in all these disparate resources that y'all have been doing over the years.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to be able to bring it all together. So yeah.
Is there anything mechanically that you think has really truly been kind of influenced by video games in this system so far?
Yeah, so that is a really good question, and essentially the core gameplay loop of the game. There's our attacking mechanic, right? And when you attack, you're rolling, and you roll to deal damage, right? And your target has ways to actively reduce that damage, right? Like you might use a triggered action to throw up a parry or that kind of thing, but there is no roll to hit, right? Like there is no like, hey, I'm going to roll to see if I hit you, because our game is pretty tactical too. And often in a tactical game, it might take a while for your turn to come back around. Now, we're working on making that as speedy as possible, right? But when people have options on their sheet and that kind of thing, it might take 10 minutes before it's your turn again. So it feels crappy when you roll and you're like, I missed. Cool. Next turn. All right, I'll see you in 20 minutes, right? Or whatever. For people to have that happen as they go around the table. So one of the things that we've done is like, okay, whenever you roll, you're probably, especially as a player character, you're going to deal damage. You're going to do something. It's a question of how much effect does that have? Does it have a great effect in terms of damage? Does that person also fail some sort of resistance roll? And that means now they're also going to suffer an effect, but you're always kind of making progress and contributing, right? And when we looked at that, we're like, are there other games that do this? There are other tabletop role-playing games like Into the Odd, right, that do that. But we also were like, hey, this means that you're probably going to start out with, as a player character, right, a lot of hit points if we want you to feel heroic, a lot of health. So what does that mean? Well, can we do that? Well, actually, there's games like Diablo that basically work this way, right? Where in Diablo, if you're getting attacked, you're probably going to take some damage. In a Final Fantasy game, right? Your characters have a lot of health. In League of Legends, right? You start out with 300 health at first level for your characters. And all of that is because they have this mechanic of okay, you're going to deal damage, right? So we took inspiration there. We also took inspiration for the idea of we were thinking about equipment and how should equipment work. And we were talking about oh, you know what? Our game kind of works like Marvel's Midnight Suns, right? Which is an XCOM game with Marvel characters.
Right.
And they have these different outfits that change their stats, right? Depending on the uniform, the costume that they're wearing. If you're yellow Wolverine versus, leather jacket Wolverine or that kind of thing. So we were like, well, what if instead of, hey, this is your equipment, you have a kit loadout, and your kit loadout is things like, hey, you have a heavy weapon and heavy armor, and your kit is called the Mountain, right? But you get to decide, what does your heavy armor look like? Well, I want my heavy armor to be a lot of plates or ring mail, or I want my heavy armor to be big wooden planks tied to, metal gears. And I want my weapon to be a maul or a great axe, or I want my weapon to be a really big board with a nail through it, right? That allows you a level of customization and imagination that comes with role-playing games, but the idea is backed up by video games, right? That video games have this idea of kits, right? And this idea of you're not choosing necessarily a sword and a shield, which you can in many video games, right? Like Baldur's Gate. But the idea is no, I'm a sword and board fighter, and I get to decide what that looks like. But here's what that means statistically for me. And that was after experimenting with sort of a la carte equipment. We wound up in this other place, and all of that was inspired by video games. We were having a play test once, and we were talking about what's the role of armor. And, we were going back and forth, and our art director, who was in the playtest, who comes from video games, said, in a lot of video games and a lot of war games, too, armor just adds to your health. And we thought about it, and we were like, yeah, because essentially armor helps you live longer, right? Armor avoids damage and therefore live. What if we just gave you a bunch of extra health, and that would effectively accomplish a similar thing? So that is how armor works now in our game. So yeah, we're constantly looking at stuff from video games and how it affects us,
which is really interesting because if you think about it, video games, the original video games trace their lineage directly back to games like D&D and all the board games that we played back in the 70s and 80s, right?
It's the snake eating its tail.
Yeah. So what would you say is probably the most experimental mechanics that you guys are really digging into right now for the RPG? Something that isn't necessarily drawing direct inspiration from any other source. Something really, this is yours,
Yeah. Well, so, and as I start this, I'm going to say there is nothing new under the sun. right?
This is true. Everything is a
so,
remix, right?
Anything I say, someone is going to be able to point to a game somewhere and say, actually, it's like that, right? And I
Right.
acknowledge that.
Yes.
So I think for us, one of the big things that we look at is, and this is a little bit inspired by some video game stuff too, right? And I can get into how, but like, one of the big things we talked about was like, one reason D20 fantasy games don't necessarily make for a heroic experience is because they're games of attrition, right? Which means that, like, at the start of the day, I start with all of my spell slots and all of my rages and all of my battle master dice and all of my key points, right? And I winnow those down until I need to rest, and then I rest and I come back and I'm back to full, right? And we did not want to do that because one of the things we think about is like heroes keep going, right? And heroes get to do their cool stuff, right? And the idea that like Legolas only has 4 Battlemaster Fighter dice, right, to use in the battles of Helm's Deep is like, well, that doesn't really track with what we think about heroic stories. At the same time, we don't want the game to be a cakewalk and say you can just always use Battlemaster Fighter dice, right? So we started to think about like, how should this work? And we got this idea that like every class in our game, and it is a class-based game, has a resource that they manage, right? And this comes from, actually, you can see this philosophy in our 5e product, the Beast Heart, which is an original class. It's like a pet class we have, right? And we wanted to take that philosophy and bring it to a bunch of our classes. And so the idea is like every class has this resource that, let's say, the Tactician, right? Which is you're a warrior who can help command allies in battle, and you yourself are like a weapon master and know how to use all kinds of fancy weapons, right? So sort of like an Aragorn type, right? Like you're a commander, and you yourself are a great warrior. They build a resource called focus. Every time they make an attack in the game, they build some focus, right? And when they build focus, then they can spend that focus to activate other maneuvers, right? Like an inspiring blow, which when they hit somebody, it allows their ally to heal a little bit. Or an attack called Hammer and Anvil, where they hit somebody and so does a friend at the same time, right? Boom. They can command their fellows to like take an attack in place of them, all that kind of stuff. Those abilities are fueled by their focus. And so what it means is that as the battle goes on, right, you're building up more and more focus. You might get more, you build up to bigger things you can do, or you could spend a little bit on your turn to do something a little more impactful, right? So those are kind of the ideas of like, that's how one resource works. And then throughout the day, every time they achieve success, both in combat, right, like when they win a battle, or when they solve a puzzle, have a great negotiation, overcome like a big challenge, they earn a victory. And that victory then means that you start every battle with focus equal to the number of victories you have. So the battle gets more interesting as it goes on, right? Which is sort of what we expect in a heroic narrative. Not that like, hey, all the cool stuff happens at the beginning of the battle, and then by the end, we're just trying to kill this one goblin off in the corner. No. Right. It should be that like you build up to cooler and cooler stuff, but it also means that as the adventuring day goes on, right, you start each battle with more focus, and so things get more interesting from there, right? And every class has resources that work in such a way that like they can do interesting and cool stuff with them, and throughout the day they build their capacity for that. And so it's spellcasters work a little differently, right? Like our talent has a negative resource called strain that they take on, but their capacity for strain increases as they gain victories. So what they could do, and they also get to remove some strain as they gain victories. So it means that like, yes, I can do all of the things you would expect me to do as a talent, which is like our psionic class, right? So I can move things with my mind, and I can use these big ults and stuff. But by the final combat of the adventure, I can do my biggest thing 3 or 4 times, and I could only maybe do it once at the beginning in the first battle of the day, depending on how you've managed your strain and everything like that. So that's really the mechanics that we're very proud of, are these class mechanics of resources and victories working together, right? And it's a little bit inspired by the idea of like fighting games that have like a limit bar, right? Where it's like you want to fill up your limit bar and then you can do your cool thing. So we were like, oh, this is kind of like that, right? When we were thinking about it, we came up with the idea first, but then we realized like, oh, there are games that do this. It's a lot of fighting video games will make that happen. Yeah.
I really like that idea. But D&D is so ingrained into my brain. I love that kind of ramps up like kind of the epicness of a battle. But I'm concerned about how that might influence the level of challenge and lethality. Like, do the creatures that your heroes are going up against, do they have the same kind of gauges that they're filling up and that sort of thing?
Yeah,
or have you
great
gotten
question.
that far
No,
yet?
that's a really, really good question. We are in development, right? Like all of this could change. That's a good point. That is one of the things, right? Is that like are monsters that you might fight in this game, and this is primarily a game about fighting monsters. You'll find that like they also have these big impactful abilities that are deadly. Now, the way they use them is a little different, right? Like we've experimented with the director, which is what we call a game master in our game. The director like having their own resource that they can spend on different abilities and stuff, but it becomes a lot to manage, right? When you're doing that for one hero, it's great, right? You're able to be like, cool, I'm going to do this and I've got this and I'll save this for this. Whereas like the director is like, well, I could have a shared pool, which means I'll probably just have one creature spam the same thing over and over again. Or I could track it individually for creatures, which is going to be a nightmare for me. Or we can do something else, right? And so what we end up with right now is that creatures have a lot of abilities that they can use a certain number of times per encounter, right? And so that allows it's very easy. I just check the box next to that ability and I can move on. And we have advice about like, hey, if your heroes have this many victories, right, they're going to be stronger. So you can throw more people at them for encounter building and stuff like that. But our creatures are, if anybody has seen Matt's action-oriented creatures video, which is really great, I highly recommend it. It talks about a great way to build boss monsters and monsters that will actually challenge your party. That is the philosophy that we've carried into this, right? So creatures have a lot of options on their turn, the same way heroes do. They have ways to get out of stuff. They have ways to deal a lot of damage to one person. They have ways to deal a little bit of damage to many people, right? So you have that flexibility as a GM to keep challenging your party as well, because we don't want it to be heroic. Doesn't mean it's easy, right? Heroic means I feel cool and I feel like I have the tools to succeed, but we're going to make it hard for you. And it's got to be hard for it to actually feel heroic, right? Like you want it to, at the end of a battle, be like, oh, my goodness, I thought they almost had us there, right? And so we, instead of saying like, hey, things get easier for you as you go on, which is true in a fight, right? Like things are going to get easier for the heroes as it goes on. It means that things at the start of the fight are going to be hard, right? And that's where there's that back and forth where it's like, cool, I started with all these resources. I hit the monster in the face. Oh no, now it's the monster's turn. Oh God, they have and so it's that back and forth that we're really.
It's almost like an inversion
right
of the D&D approach.
Yes.
Little bit.
Yeah.
Now, how similar are monster stats and rules compared to players? Like in D&D, to go back to that chestnut, there's considerable overlap, but there are divergences. Like how are you guys approaching that?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of games about fighting monsters, there's what I would call like asymmetrical design, which means that like the players are treated one way, right? The player characters, and then the director-controlled creatures are handled another way. And ours is enough that ours has enough overlap that if you were to had only played a player character and you got behind the screen with the monster book, you would know what you were doing, right? You'd be like, I see, like, this creature has might and agility, this creature has might and agility, this creature has health, this creature has health, right? And then the things that are different, right? Like, hey, I would say in general, monsters are simpler because we expect you to be running multiple at once.
Right.
But yeah, there's not that many things that are going to make you go like, well, I don't know how to run this. This is totally different, right? I made a game called Burn Bright a long time ago, and that had like intentionally very asymmetrical design. The creatures run very differently than the player characters. We like that. We've experimented with that for this game. And so we may do that in the future. It could wind up in this game at some point. But right now, I would say similar to 5e or Pathfinder in the sense that, like, okay, there are some things creatures have that player characters don't. There's a lot of things player characters have that creatures don't, because they have all of these extra options and things like that. But at their core, they work very similarly.
Yeah, and I think probably the thing that really kind of exacerbates that difference in D&D is that when you're going up against a monster, it seems very straightforward. You seem a little more evenly matched. When, say, a character gets charmed or mind controlled into attacking the rest of the party, it becomes like, holy cow, how are we going to defeat our party member? They seem so much more powerful than the monsters we're fighting. It's just it feels like you guys are going to address that
yes,
kind of dichotomy
that's the
a little bit better.
That's the hope.
Now we talked about combat, and you said it's a very tactical game. What kinds of non-combat systems are you guys including?
Yeah, excellent question.
I don't necessarily mean just for facilitating role playing, but just in terms of like interacting with the world, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you will see a system for making, skill checks, right? Essentially, it is different than what you've seen in D&D a little bit, but it is very similar in that, like, you match up one of your characteristics, and you match up a skill you have, and you combine those things together to make a roll, right? I would say more like Vampire the Masquerade in that we are encouraging people to mix and match those things more, right? You can do that in 5e, but 5e puts on your sheet, like, your bonus for persuasion should be your proficiency bonus if you are proficient in persuasion plus your charisma bonus, right?
Right.
And like it makes it harder to separate. What we've done is essentially you have your characteristic scores, right, which are flat numbers that you get to add. But then if you have proficiency in a skill that applies to this, you get to add an extra die that you roll, and that adds to the thing, right? So that makes it a little easier to like separate stuff. So we'll have that, right? Like that's going to be one of the main ways that you're interacting with the world, both in and out of combat, right? You might make skill rolls in combat too. And then we also have a system we're working on for negotiation, right? And we don't think of negotiation as every single time you interact with someone, you'll be using negotiation, right? Like, no, it might be fine to, when you're just trying to deceive a guard to get into a masquerade party that requires an invitation or whatever. That's one skill check. Cool. Great. Negotiation is for, we're sitting down, we're having a conversation, and I'm trying to convince you to do something for me, right? And you need to be convinced, right? Like if you're just cool with it, we don't need negotiation. And so we have a system for that because we do think that that is part of our heroic narrative, is like the heroes are always going to do the right thing. It can be harder to convince NPCs to do the right thing, right? And like sometimes you need an army or a boat or a book that a wizard has, right? Or you need to convince a lich to like, look, you got to stand down, right? I know this is your forest. We've agreed nobody's going to come through here, but like we need to get through to your forest to get through the evil tyrant on the other side. You've got to let us through. If you don't, that tyrant is going to come and lay waste to the forest. So let us through. And you know, like that kind of negotiating and stuff, we think is a big part of the tale. So we have a system for that. We have a system for what I call complex tests. It's very similar to skill challenges in 4th edition, but we've streamlined it. We've taken out the things that people don't like about it. We've made it easier to understand. It's for sort of montage-y type challenges, right? Where it's like, hey, we've got to cross this desert and we've got to do it fast. Or, hey, we need to sneak through this graveyard without the zombies realizing that we're here, right? So it's those kinds of things you'll see. We have that. And then we're also going to have a system for crafting and research in here that is going to allow you to do things like, yes, create magic items and potions and stuff like that, but also like, you know, research how to make a flying castle if you want to, or nice. You know, like an automaton bodyguard, right? That kind of thing.
Are you planning on incorporating any of the stuff that you guys have made for 5e, like in Strongholds and Followers and Kingdoms and Warfare, that sort of thing?
That's great question. Probably not in the core of the game. So we do have plans for it, probably as supplemental material. We wanted to include all of that stuff as core, but we also want to make this a print product, and therein lies the problem, right? Right. A book can only be so big before it becomes super expensive to make and ship. And so we were like, okay, let's get the core systems, the things that we need, and put those in.
Now becomes a tome, right? You know.
Yes, yeah, exactly. One of the things you might see, though, that we've added is our companion system, which is our system for having pets, basically, in the game. So if the Beast Heart class becomes core, the Beast Heart uses that system, right, to be like the best at having a pet. But those pet rules, any character can use them to have a pet, right? That like, and our pets are monstrous, right? So they're things like, you know, oozes and baby dragons and giant spiders and stuff like that. It's not it's not like having a French poodle or something like that. Although could make a cool French poodle companion. No shade to French poodles.
You know, I think it all depends on how they're groomed, right? You know, it's the hairstyle, the way they cut. You know,
it's true. If they're in a puppy cut, it's a whole thing.
Poodle, if you really tried.
You can. You just got to shave lightning bolts into the side. That actually makes your poodle faster. It's
Let's talk about spell casting for a minute. What are you guys thinking of in terms of the systems around spellcasters and how they operate?
So it would be about that heroic resource we talked about earlier. Every spellcaster will have a bespoke way of casting spells, right? So D&D Pathfinder, right? Everybody kind of casts spells basically the same way, right? Like there are differences and there are weirdness with warlocks and stuff like that. But essentially, everybody has.
You get access to new spell lists as you level up, and it's a little different for each.
Yeah, and there are spells that overlap, right? Where it's like everybody can learn Dispel Magic, or a lot of people can learn Fireball, or and so. I think what you would see is not a giant spell list from us, but a giant list of abilities that different classes can have. So like our section for the Elementalist, right, which is a spellcaster who can control the elements, it is probably going to have like, hey, you can shoot a lightning bolt, and you can create a ball of fire, and you can create a wall of earth, right? All that kind of stuff is going to be part of it, but that's going to be specific to the Elementalist. And the way the Elementalist will create those things is through their resource, right? And they'll have a unique way of generating their resource and using it. And not everybody generates their resource in combat, right? Like we expect the tactician probably just needs focus in combat. They can do other stuff out of combat. It's not fueled by focus, right? The Elementalists, though, we would expect to be able to do the things they do in combat to do outside of combat and have those be helpful, right? And so they'll maintain their resource outside of combat as well in order to do the cool magic stuff that they want to be able to do, because like sometimes you want a wall of earth so that you can raise a person up and they can walk over a wall, right? Like that's cool. We want people to be able to do that stuff. We don't want to limit it. So that's one of the ways that we think we're very different from 4th edition, is that we'll have a lot of utility for magic users outside of combat.
Nice. Now I know you're calling it a heroic fantasy. Is that how you're kind of sidestepping the concept of alignment?
It's a good question. So I feel like we just don't see a need for alignment in this game, right?
Gotcha.
There are certainly forces of law and chaos and forces of good and evil, but yeah, we do expect that. The expectation, if you're playing this game, is that you are a person who is going to do heroic things, right? Which means like you're probably going to save some people, which in and of itself, if you're risking your life to save people, means you're probably good, right? Yeah. Now, there's nothing in the game currently that says you have to play that way, right? You could, if you want to take it and be evil and be a crappy person, totally can. But I would say the game mostly supports the idea. The rules will mostly support the idea that you are telling a heroic story. So yeah, in many ways, that's one reason why we don't think there's a need for something like alignment. But the other thing is like, I feel like if I were to, say Spider-Man is neutral good, right? I would get a zillion responses, including like, no, he's chaotic good. No, he's chaotic evil, and here's why.
Right.
And like there's all kinds of things. I think a long time ago I had a blog and I wrote about how the Joker was chaotic evil in the blog, and I thought like, this is undisputed, right? And people were showing up and they were like, no, he's chaotic neutral. And I was like, he murders people. How is this it's another reason to not have it. It's sort of ill-defined at this point.
Well, and I kind of feel like alignment was always a solution looking for a problem, right? It was a lot of rules around something so abstract that and I think the biggest problem is that like on one day you can be chaotic evil and kill someone,
exactly,
and on another day you could be chaotic neutral. Like I'm not killing anybody today, right?
Yeah. Listen, just go work in an office environment, and you will go through all of the alignments in a day. In a day, yeah,
exactly. But I think in terms of how it used to be presented back in D&D. I loved some of the stuff that they came up with around like the planes and the different alignments kind of aligning to different planes, but it didn't really tie too well with like the concept of alignment as your character, or like how do you deal with that in terms of if you're a cleric, cleric rules especially, right? Like cleric rules were very like narrowly defined as like this is a good cleric, but then there's evil deities, and how do you handle that? And it just seemed like utter confusion. And then of course
100%.
D&D is trying to distance itself from the concept of alignment these days.
Yes. Yeah.
Now how obviously you don't have the baggage of D&D and like some of the setting and monster kind of stuff that they've had to like step away from previous editions and like representations and that sort of thing. Is there anything you can say about the game's setting and how it's influenced by the themes that you're putting forth?
Yeah, so the setting is Matt's world. In fact, if people have watched like the Chain stream or any of the actual play streams that he's done, it's that world.
And I'm still holding out for more Chain of Acheron. So
I mean, I don't know, right? Like I'm not part of the Chain, so I can't make any promises there. But I think, who knows? That story may continue yet. But I do. That's the thing, is like you'll be able to continue the story of the Chain if you want to, using the setting information that we have. So I would say for these core rule books we're currently putting out, the setting is kind of minimal. It's there to inform things. It's there to help you understand where we're coming from. But it's not a there's as much setting in this book as there is as much Greyhawk in the 3rd edition Player's Handbook, or as much Forgotten Realms as there is in the 5e Handbook, right?
Right.
And so people are going to be able to very easily play this in their own games. And so that's one of the big things when we think about it is like, okay, Vasloria, which is like our medieval fantasy analog, right, is where a lot of this, like a lot of our examples are going to come from. There's also Capital, which is this big city that is on the same planet as Vasloria.
Yeah. Love Capital. Capital's awesome.
Capital's great. Yes, yeah. And all of that right there, that happens on a planet called Orden, and Orden is in the timescape, which is connected to other planets by the Sea of Stars. And people can get on boats, and not everybody, not common folk, but magic people know how to like get on boats and sail the Sea of Stars and go to other places. And your world, your homebrew world, might be one of those places in the timescape, right? And so, and we plan on like mainly thinking about like you could have adventures in Vasloria, you could have adventures in the city of Capital specifically, or you could have timescape adventures where you're going all over the place, like the Guardians of the Galaxy. And so those 3 settings have informed us in like, okay, well, negotiation is definitely something that you would do in Vasloria and Capital. And even on the times when you're out there sailing the Sea of Stars, right? You might negotiate with another boat or that kind of thing. And we thought about the heroics specifically that you might want to do there. And so we're thinking about like what archetypes would show up in these places, right? Well, for the core rules, we want things that can likely be in all of them and make sense, right? So like the idea that a tactician has a place on a boat in the Sea of Stars, in Capital and in Vasloria, yes, absolutely, right? So that's the way that like we're informed by these 3 settings. And right now, as we're working on the core, we're thinking about like what makes sense in all of them, particularly what makes sense in Vasloria, because we know that a lot of our players are 5th edition D&D players who are playing in their own worlds, which are often like a medieval fantasy analog, right? And so we want to make sure that we can support that style of play, because we have a lot of people who are going to come to us having only known one kind of role-playing game, and we want to ease them into the process that way. So there's a lot of thinking about like, as we're creating different pieces of the game, does this belong in our setting? Does it belong in all 3? Cool. Then let's put it in the book, right? And if it doesn't, if it only belongs in 2, is there something else we should bring in instead? Or is this cool enough that like there might be some stuff where it's like, yeah, but we really want people to get excited about the timescape, so we're going to put this monster or this class or this ancestry option in there because it's too cool to not, and it shows how our game can be different for folks.
So that actually begs the question: have you been talking to anybody, anyone else in the TTRPG sphere, like any other people who are currently working on, say, 5th edition or Pathfinder products, about creating supplements using your system?
We have talked to some folks about it sort of tertially. We didn't want to put the cart before the horse, in the sense that like we weren't sure if we were going to fund. And so I think those conversations will pick up in earnest once the crowdfunding campaign is over. And we'll be able to say to people like, look, this many people are interested in the system, because what people want, the reason there's a lot of third-party support for D&D is a lot of people play it, which means that you can make money on your products, right? Or at least break even. It's hard to do. This is a small niche hobby. Not a lot of people are in it. A lot of people play one game. So you're trying to like appeal to that sense, right? So if we can show people, hey, you can make money. And also, by the way, it's really easy to make stuff in our system. You don't need permission. Our license is very easy to use. It's not going to go away. It's irrevocable, right? If we can do all of those things, I think it will make people want to work with us, and it will make it easy for them to work with us. But so we want to get that in place so that we can show people we're serious and that they're protected if they're working with us, and that they have an audience who's going to be eager to buy their products if they do. So that's the work we have to do first before we can say, like, these folks are on board, because it's ultimately going to be up to them, right? We've got to do our best, and then hopefully that's good enough for people to come on board.
Well, I imagine with the success of the campaign that your your email inboxes have been filling up quite a bit with people who want to get involved.
Yes, definitely, which is great. Very flattering. Very, very flattering.
Now, I imagine you probably can't talk too much about it right now, but I imagine you have some supplements that are in the pipeline, especially now that you know that this game is absolutely getting made.
Yeah, I can talk about one of them at least, because it was a stretch goal for us. And this is not included with the campaign. The stretch goal was like, now we can work on this. So this is not a thing that backers get. But essentially, we're going to try to work on a Vasloria campaign setting box set. Right.
Nice.
That's going to have an adventure, and people are going to be able to come in and play it. Right. We would like to, if possible, and if it makes sense to do so. Right. So this is all from this point on. Nothing is guaranteed. We would like to be able to do that with the other two settings I mentioned, with Capital and with the Timescape, right? And have sort of a box for each. And then we envision product lines for all of them. In fact, we tweeted out a picture of a whiteboard that had those, like the first 4 products in each detailed. This was months and months ago before we started the crowdfunder. But you know, those are the things, like, we imagine that, like, in Vasloria, you'll probably have warfare, right? And a system for getting units and that sort of thing, and maybe building a stronghold. Whereas in Capital, you'll probably have a system for intrigue, right? And organizations and things like that. So you might have vehicular, like, ship-to-ship combat in the Timescape book, right? All of these are things that you can use outside of those for your own setting if you want to. So what we'll probably do is say, like, here are the general rules for it. Here's how it would work in these specific places. So, you know, those are all things worth thinking about. Nothing is guaranteed.
Were you expecting this level of of success with the crowdfund? What did you guys think was going to happen?
So you ask any member of the staff and you'll get a different answer. There was our general manager I was feeling pretty confident and was like, I think this is going to do very well. But, you know, I had no idea, right? And a lot of people on the staff, too, were like, well, let's see, right? First of all, we launched in December, which is a lot of conventional wisdom will say don't launch in December because people want things they can get now to give as gifts, not things they get 18 months from now. You can't give somebody an IOU, especially for crowdfunders, which, you know, many of which famously don't deliver. Ours have always delivered, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. But, like, it's not a good bet for people. Yeah. Thank you. The second thing is that this is a fairly new platform for us, right? So we'd used BackerKit as a crowdfunding campaign for a small print run of a thing that we did this summer called Where Evil Lives. But we had not really done, like, a full, hey, product launch campaign on it before. So it was a new platform for us. And then the other thing was, it was a new game. It wasn't 5e, right? So all three of those combined had me, at the very least. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but me a little bit like, I don't know. I guess we'll see, right? And so it was very exciting when the first day we funded, within, like, the first 2 hours. And that was
then you
huge
got up to
relief.
2 million in the first day, which is crazy.
Yeah. It was. I mean, it's been a wild ride. I don't think anybody expected it to do this well. right?
Yeah.
And so it is an honor, and if you're out there and if you have contributed to the campaign, thank you, because you're allowing us to make this happen. Our patrons too as well. We have a bunch of people on Patreon who are basically now supporting us, and they get to look behind the scenes and see stuff early and get looks at development of the game. Thank you to them as well, because they got us to the point where we could actually do this. So it's huge, and it is overwhelming. And so yeah, we had no idea. I had no idea.
If I recall, you guys haven't just been posting like, in progress like stuff about the game on Patreon. You've been posting that on the YouTube channel as well, if I'm correct.
Yes, yeah. So we have a series. Matt's famous for running the game, right? On our channel, we have a series called Designing the Game, where Matt and I, and hopefully other people at the company, will talk about the game's development, maybe show off art. Like we'll see how it goes. We'd like to show all kinds of pieces of the development. We also, I stream on Twitch every week. Matt streams all the time, and like those are basically open Q&As where we'll talk about anything too. So no one who works for us signs an NDA. We can sort of talk about whatever
Nice.
as it comes up, and we like to share that openness. And I'll be honest with you, it would be impossible to spoil something before Matt Colville does it himself, right? So like I'll be Matt. I'll have a meeting with Matt, and then Matt will be like, "Okay, I'm going to go stream," and he's talking about the meeting we just had, right? So like, which is great. It's so freeing as an employee to know, like, all right, I didn't say the wrong thing here, right? Because we're making games, right? We're not protecting the nuclear codes or anything. So
right.
It's fun.
You're not a big corporate entity. You're like it feels like it is very refreshing. Just from my standpoint, it's very refreshing because there's so much information that you guys have put out there that I can dive into. The only concern that I had when I was preparing for this interview was, oh, what if I talk about something that they've already changed? Right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like, I'm getting a packet ready for patrons, and there's literally stuff I sent to them last week that I'm like, well, some of this is not true anymore, and people are going to be surprised, right?
Right.
So, but that's one reason I'm also excited to get this first packet out to folks on the Patreon, because many of them are so eager just to read at like, what do you have, right? And it's like, here's a lot of what's done. And by done, I mean still in progress and still can totally change. But like, here's a lot of what we've done so far. And now you all will have the tools, because right now it's like every tidbit of information people are scrutinizing, and it's like, whew, all right. Okay, let's give you a lot to check out, and then we can have a way to gather your feedback and stuff. Because it's great. It's great to see that enthusiasm and energy that folks have.
And that can be super hard too, right? Because a lot of people aren't really familiar with an iterative design process, right? And so they think that if you put it out there, that's how it is, right? And I imagine that has been a little difficult to deal with in some of the feedback as well.
Yeah. It's anytime you do open development like this, right? And this is huge, that like we've got a lot of people watching, a lot of people interested, some people trying to piece together pieces of our game to play their own, right? Like some people have done that based on the information that's come out on the Patreon. I think you're going to have people who analyze the crap out of it. And I did that same thing when D&D Next was happening, right? Every little piece of information we got from, I was that person. So I totally get it. And I love that people love the game that much. It is very exciting. And there are times where like people will be like, in Patreon for 2 hours, or in Discord, right, for 2 hours, are going to talk about what is the right name for this class that we have already named. And it's like, hey, just so you know, like that's the name. What we told you, that's going to be the name. But if people want to talk about it, like, that's part of the fun, right? Part of the fun of being a nerd is having all of these debates and stuff, and it's great.
So you say you're working on a packet for the Patreon backers. Mm-hmm. That's a playtest packet?
Yes, so what that's going to be is that'll be a short adventure, some pre-gens, and the rules and monsters you need to play through that adventure, and that's it to start, right? We're not at the place yet where it's like, here, go create your own things and build things. We hope to be soon. But yeah, so that's the plan, is that's where that will be, hopefully by the end of the year.
Nice. Now, are you considering doing a wider release of that? Like maybe if that goes successful, maybe making that available to the public, or possibly even staging playtests at some of the conventions in 2024 or 2025.
So by 2024, I don't know when, let's say mid. We imagine we will be releasing to our backers and folks who pre-order, because it's on backer kit. Even when the campaign ends, you'll still be able to get in and order. We will have released a packet or two or three, or who knows, to everybody who has pre-ordered and backed, right? So that's the idea, is that we will be we have a pipeline. It starts with the dev team and it ends with the backers getting to look at stuff, right?
Gotcha.
And the patrons are the step before the backers, but I imagine the patrons are going to get to look at a lot more than the backers are. So because the backers are not necessarily signing up to see every step of development the way the patrons are.
Right.
So
that's a big... the patrons are backers. So
yes, yeah, there's a good chance there too, right? That there's some overlap there. So that's where that's how that will go. We're talking about conventions right now. I don't know which ones you'll see us at, but we would like to get to some conventions in 2024 to run this game for folks.
Excellent. That would be. I would love to see that. That would be pretty darn cool, actually. Let's see. We're running a little over an hour. Probably need to let you go soon. The problem is that I keep on thinking of more questions.
That's okay.
So let me ask you this. The response that you guys have had, has that changed any of y'all's plans or thoughts about what you're going to, how you're going to, has it impacted any designs? Has it affected the pipeline that you guys originally envisioned?
So far it has not, right? But what we're going to do is, once this packet goes out, there will be like a survey to collect feedback and stuff like that. And that's how we will see things go from there. Right now, we really believe in the mechanics. We play this game, right? We play this game in the office. We have an internal testing team who's playing this game and has fun when they play it and is really enjoying it. So we believe in it, right? Like, the one reason we are very vocal about what this game is and how its core mechanics work, and is we know that what we've done is, instead of go broad, we've gone deep, right?
Right.
And because we've gone deep, we want to tell people what this is so that they are not disappointed, right? If somebody looks at this and says, heroic fantasy's not for me, tactical's not for me, always hitting is not for me, that's why we're telling you, right? We want you to be excited about it if you're excited, and if it's not for you, hey, we live in a boom time of role-playing games. There are a zillion role-playing games out there for folks. I love dungeon crawling, right? I love an old school experience, and I would like to, at some point, make a game that goes deep on that, right? I would like to, at some point, make a game that goes deep on super heroics, right? And so that's one reason we're letting people know this is, hey, here's the deal. What the backer kit has shown us is there's enough people who read it and say, that is for me. That is what I want. And so it's only shored up our plans so far. Will things change when the survey goes? Right? It could be that like all the patrons get it and they're like, this is not what I expected. I would be surprised because we've been telling them a lot of what's been going on. But if people get it and they're like, this isn't fun, this isn't what I expected, then yeah, our goal, number one goal, is fun first, right?
Right.
So if anything like that happens with people who are backing or supporting us in some way, I think then we will take stock. But right now the testers really like it, and there's always little adjustments you make along the way to make the game more and more fun. And so far that's been working out. So far the response has been very good, very positive, which has only encouraged us to move forward.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, that actually begs. Let me end this with one final question. You were saying that this is like a banner time for TTRPGs right now, and it's clear in the way you've been talking that you've looked at and even played a lot of them in regards to like how you're approaching your system, doing a little, I guess, competitive analysis, so to speak. But is there anything out there right now that you find exciting, like in terms of the TTRPG world and some of the new systems and ideas that have kind of bubbled up in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to love. I play a lot of games, and one reason to go to conventions is to experience a lot of games, right? There might be games that you've always wanted to play. You can't get the group together for it. You can't find somebody to teach you the rules. Go to Gen Con, play a bunch of different games, or go to your local con and play a bunch of different games, because there will be someone who is willing and eager to teach you that game, and they will assemble a group of people around you who also want to learn, and it's a great time. I also read a lot of games as well. So for me, one of the companies to watch is Free League.
Yep.
Everything that comes out of there is incredible, right?
Yes.
They just put out a Walking Dead game, right? And
Yeah.
I read the Walking Dead comics when they first came out, and I watched some of the show, but like many people eventually fell off because it was like, well, this is going on. It's not as good, whatever. And I was like, man, I feel sort of Walking Deaded out, but the fact that Free League is making it makes me want to play that game. Right. Their Alien game is, oh my God, so awesome. So amazing. What they did with the One Ring, they took the One Ring and slimmed down the rule book and didn't lose any of the feel or anything. They made the experience way more streamlined. It's great. So Free League is definitely one of the places to watch in terms of like people doing amazing stuff. Obviously, people have heard of like Morkborg, I think probably.
Yes, Morkborg. I love. Actually, John got me hooked on Morkborg. John
nice.
Farrell.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really, really awesome. So yeah, I think there's a lot that Free League is currently doing that is wonderful. In general, I'm like really, really excited about the number of things that people are doing to help support people who want to make stuff using their games or rules, right? So like, it's really cool to see Paizo make Orc, right, happen.
Yeah.
That was amazing that they have done that. I think it's really cool to see what like folks like Che and Peiku, who are map makers on Patreon, right? They have this license and what that looks like, what the Shadow Dark license looks like, right? So there are all these cool things that and it could be in response to the OGL, but some of it was happening before that, right? And it's just like people thinking about the best way to grow the community of creators, and to me that's really exciting because it means we're going to get a lot of cool stuff. Like when Forged in the Dark became available, the number of cool things, right? Scum and Villainy, and Band of Blades, right? Like that, those kinds of things. All of these cool things came out. The Gumshoe system has all of these amazing Bubble Gumshoe and like Night's Black Agents couldn't be more different in tone, but they're both about solving mysteries and use the same game. And it's like, what? How does this work?
Right.
So that kind of thing, people sharing systems and seeing what gets made of it is very exciting. And I got to give a final shout out to Shadow of the Weird Wizard. I'm a big Shadow of the Demon Lord fan. And I really like that rule set. So if Shadow of the Demon Lord is a game by Rob Schwalb, who did a lot of stuff for 5th and 4th edition, really great game that sort of has a Army of Darkness comedy horror gross feel.
Okay.
If that's not your genre, Shadow of the Weird Wizard is Rob's game that is coming out. Was successful on Kickstarter. That is going to make it so that you can have high fantasy using those rules. And it's really great. I got to play test it a couple of years ago at Winter Fantasy. Rob's the man. So really, really excited about that, and all the other cool stuff that we're seeing. Coyote and Crow's great. Oh man, I could talk about this forever.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
We could do a whole other hour on this, I'm sure.
We could.
Well, I'm gonna have to check some of those out for sure. We're definitely aggressively trying to cover more indie TTRPG stuff and at Gaming Trend, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us like this. It just occurred to me that we didn't even get into a lot of things like leveling system, the VTT you guys are talking about, working on. So maybe we can have you on again. Maybe have you as a guest on our podcast, Tabletop Throwdown, that we're premiering in 2024.
It would be an honor, Mike. It would be an honor to come back.
Super
so
cool.
thank you.
That would be
thank
super
you.
cool. Well, thanks again, James. Give Matt my best.
I will. Thank you.
And yeah, I can't wait to see. Let me just. When are you guys thinking the system is going to be actually in players' hands, like beyond just like playtesting? When are you?
So good question. So we 18 months from close. So that would be like June of 2025 by the latest. Right?
So just in time
it feels
for
weird to say 2025. yeah. But if we can get it to folks sooner, we will, right?
Right.
So that's the plan. Like we're really very early in development right now. One reason we didn't talk about leveling up is still working on it.
Okay,
so,
well, that's good. That's good.
So thank you, Mike. Thank you to you, and thank you to producer behind the scenes, John. I really appreciate it.
Yes, John, for those of you who can't see the chat, which is everybody, John has been feeding us some questions, and he was going to be on this interview as well, but he's been having some technical difficulties. So we all know how that goes. We love you, John.
We do.
But thanks again, James, and
thank you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put a link to the crowdfund in the details below, and definitely go check out the MCDM channel if you're curious about the game, and if you're really curious, join the Patreon. I'm part of the Patreon. You can get all those back issues of Arcadia, which is an amazing digital magazine that they came out with over the last few years that I wish I had more time to read.
You and me both.
But yeah, definitely check it out. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.